You're interrupting the momentum, Brent said, cutting me off mid-sentence like I was a pop-up ad on his browser. We were in the quarterly financial prep call, just the core team, CFO, Brent, and a couple of analysts, but he made damn sure to humiliate me in surround sound. I had barely gotten the words vendor classification schema out of my mouth before he threw his hands up like I'd just farted in church. We're not here to debate theory, Cynthia, he smirked, and I swear I could hear his ego humming through the Zoom audio like a cheap fridge. Let's stay focused on forward motion. My mouse hovered over the mute button. I clicked it, shut up, and smiled like my jaw wasn't trying to crack under the pressure. But I wasn't done. Not even close. See, Brent had just parachuted in 2 months ago from some VC-funded frat house masquerading as a scaling solutions firm. He wore that self-satisfied glaze of a man who thinks bullet points and buzzwords are currency. And unfortunately, our executive team, exhausted from a hellish year of board pressure and missed growth targets, bought the illusion wholesale. My job, compliance, and risk. 6 years in. I'm the reason we've never been fined, sued, or publicly humiliated. My fingerprints are all over every vendor protocol, payment timing matrix, and contract terms clause. I knew that covenant language backward. Our primary lender had strict rules about what counted as operational versus capital expenditures, and Brent's bright idea to recategorize certain vendor payments without reconciliation wasn't just optimizing. It was lighting a match next to a gas leak. But no one in that room wanted to hear it, especially not from me. After the call, the team's Slack thread buzzed like a wasp nest. Brent posted a meme of the Grim Reaper with the caption Doomsday Debbie strikes again, followed by, seriously though, anyone got a spare tinfoil hat for our compliance queen? 2 analysts reacted with crying laughing emojis. One even tagged me, she's just passionate. With a winky face, I didn't respond. I screenshotted it, added it to a folder I'd started 3 weeks ago called Professional Detachment. That folder lived on a flash drive I kept in my purse, next to a roll of Tums and a folded copy of my notarized job scope. Because I'd learned something in 6 years of keeping this house of cards from collapsing. Paper never blinks. 2 days later, I noticed my access to the shared ledger had shifted. No more edit permissions on Q3's prep files. Curious. I checked the change log. My name had been removed at 6:42 p.m. the night after the prep call. Who did it? Brent. He hadn't said a word to me. Not a meeting, not a heads up, nothing. Just a silent digital shiv between the ribs. I messaged him directly. Hey, sorry I'm off the ledger access for Q3. Intentional, he replied, all part of streamlining, trying to reduce redundancy. Don't worry, you're still on the compliance protocols doc. Smiling face. With smiling eyes, I stared at the smiley face for a long minute. Then I opened the protocols doc. It hadn't been updated since April. The next morning, HR asked if I could start tracking my hours more precisely for payroll alignment. Translation, we're building a paper trail in case we need to shuffle you out. I know that play. I've written that play for actual layoffs when we had to clean house legally. The sudden interest in my timesheet wasn't subtle. It was a flare shot across the bow. Still, I smiled in the meetings. Said good point when Brent warbled nonsense about synergistic resource realignment. Took notes I didn't need to. And at lunch, I drove to the UPS store across from the gas station and got a memo notarized. The memo spelled out exactly what I saw. Brent's team had reused the Q2 vendor classification template without adjusting for the modified payment splits in July and August. Those splits had shifted expenses from operational to capital without reconciling timing. That mattered, because buried in Section 5.2 of our primary lending agreement was a clause. If capital outflows exceeded a certain threshold during any one quarter without matching depreciation, it would trigger a covenant breach. And that breach, it gave our lender the right to freeze drawdowns and demand early repayment. We didn't have $5 million sitting around to make that right. I attached screenshots, file timestamps, ledger line items, and a copy of the lender clause. Then I sealed it in an envelope marked to be opened if audit discrepancies arise. I didn't say a word to anyone because I already had. I'd said plenty. I'd said it in calls, in emails, in risk memos Brent never replied to, in a one-on-one where he told me to focus less on hypotheticals and more on being a team player. But now I wasn't interested in being heard. I was interested in being undeniable. Let the footnotes speak. Let the paper speak. Let his signature do the screaming later. I stapled a copy of his Slack meme to the back of the printout before I sealed the envelope. I figured the inspector would appreciate the context. The next Monday, the financial closeout meeting happened without me. I didn't realize it until a junior analyst, Marcy, bless her awkward conscience, slid into my DMs asking if I still wanted access to the updated projections. That's how I found out the final prep loop had moved to a smaller efficiency pod, handpicked by Brent. I wasn't on it. No invite, no thread, no mention. I clicked into the shared drive. Sure enough, a brand new folder had sprouted. Q3 Audit Finals Brent V3, Permissions, View Only. I sat there for a second, fingers hovering over the keyboard. My cursor blinked like it was mocking me. I opened the file out of pure masochism and found it clean. Too clean. No ledger comments, no variance notes, and none of the color-coded payment tags we used to keep from misclassifying vendor tiers. The compliance check tab had a single green cell that just said, completed white heavy check mark. Completed by who? Because I sure as hell hadn't reviewed it. Brent's version of streamlining was amputating anything that looked like accountability and calling it progress. I knew what it looked like when a leader consolidated power. Subtle at first, then surgical, revoke access, rewrite process, redefine roles, all in the name of efficiency, but really it was about silence. The CFO, Joe, usually a decent guy, had started parroting Brent's buzzwords. Modernization, velocity, lean. Meanwhile, the actual due diligence got thinner than gas station toilet paper. And I was the one left holding the unpaid invoice when it all clogged. Then came the cherry on top. HR pinged me out of the blue. Hi, Cynthia. Just wanted to follow up on our payroll documentation alignment initiative. Going forward, could you please begin logging your hours in 15-minute increments? 15-minute increments, like I was a temp. I reread the email 3 times. Same cheery tone. Same feigned ignorance. I knew this move. You start building a record. Performance review alignment. Budget optimization. Next thing you know, you're escorted out with a cardboard box full of half-dead succulents and a goodbye card signed with passive-aggressive sympathy. So I started logging my hours, all right. Right down to the moment I blinked in disbelief. And that afternoon, I went back to UPS. Notarized memo #2. This one was sharper, tighter. I named the classification schema Brent's team used. Noted that it was lifted directly from Q2 with no adjustments for the new vendor disbursement structure. July had 3 split invoices across 2 departments, and August had a deferred payout that landed squarely in the wrong ledger. The result? An extra $692,000 incorrectly tagged as CapEx instead of OpEx. That number alone pushed us over the quarterly capital threshold outlined in our lender's covenant. 1 decimal in the wrong column could trip the clause like a landmine. I attached a redacted excerpt from the lending agreement. Section 5.2b, any capital expense increase exceeding 18% quarter-over-quarter must be disclosed in writing prior to fund drawdown. Failure to disclose constitutes breach. We were at 22.6%. I dropped in screenshots of the ledger. Included the change logs showing Brent's name as the last editor. I printed the Slack thread again. Then I printed the calendar invite list, which conveniently excluded me. Added that too. Then I sealed it in a new envelope and tucked it into the bottom drawer of my desk behind a row of ergonomic wrist braces I'd never used. On the flap, I wrote, internal, prepared in anticipation of external inquiry. I didn't even bother trying to get back into the prep loop. At that point, I knew the trajectory. Brent wanted to turn compliance into a checkbox, and I was the last person in his way. His goal wasn't to collaborate, it was to erase, quietly without leaving fingerprints. He thought by sidelining me, he'd disarm the whole system. What he didn't know, what none of them realized, was that my job didn't live in shared folders or all-hands meetings. My job was proof, receipts, sequence, paper. They could revoke my access, but they couldn't unprint my warnings, couldn't unnotarize my memos, and they couldn't unsign the report he was about to submit. I didn't know when the audit would hit or whether Brent would actually sign off on the quarterly cert, but I knew the moment it happened, the die would be cast. And when the inspector flipped to that one vendor line item, when he squinted at the 22.6% bump, I'd be ready. So I smiled in meetings, nodded at Brent's strategic pivots, shared cat gifs in the team channel when prompted. And every night I emailed myself 1 encrypted copy of each new internal file, like pressing flowers from a forest fire. Not because I was paranoid, because I knew what was coming. The morning I crossed the line, it wasn't some grand declaration. No slow clap scene in a conference room. No dramatic speech about ethics and integrity. It was quieter than that, colder, like flipping a switch in a dark room and realizing the light was never coming on. It started when I opened the Q3 ledger Brent's team had finalized, his streamlined version, stripped of nuance and about as transparent as a car window tinted with lies. I wasn't supposed to have access anymore, but I did. Read only, buried under an archive permissions folder no one had thought to audit. Sloppy, really? Classic Brent. Smart enough to bluff, too lazy to sweep. I scrolled through the vendor classification columns and immediately felt the prick of heat behind my eyes. Not anger, not yet. Just the sudden drop in stomach temperature that comes when you realize the mistake isn't a one-off, it's systemic. They'd copied Q2's vendor matrix, line for line. Vendor IDs, payment categories, even the Q2 notes still clinging like lint to the comments column. And no adjustments for the July-August splits, which I knew. Been renegotiated because I sat in the damn call with procurement when it happened. 3 vendors had shifted their invoicing schedules. 1 split their scope across departments. Another deferred payout until September but recorded the obligation in August. It all should have triggered reclassification, which is basic ledger hygiene. But no, Brent's dream team of spreadsheet surgeons had just duct-taped Q2 onto Q3 and called it optimization. I didn't yell. I didn't send a snippy email or drop a passive-aggressive comment in Slack. I hit print, printed the entire sheet. Then the ledger logs showing edit history, last touched by Brentess on a Sunday night. I grabbed screen caps, printed those too. I opened the lending agreement PDF on my desktop, navigated to section 5.2b, and highlighted the trigger clause again. Capital expenditure increases over 18% without pre-disclosure. We're at 22.6%, maybe more if you factored in deferred liability. I sat back, took a breath, looked at the clock, 11:42 a.m. Lunch hour was coming. I grabbed my folder, slipped the printouts inside, and walked out without saying a word. The UPS store smelled like toner and indifference. I'd been there before. The notary, Lisa, recognized me. She didn't ask questions, just glanced at the stack, slid the pages into her binder, and started stamping. "This for work?" she asked absently, blowing on the seal. Eventually, I said. When she handed it back, I slid everything into a large manila envelope, sealed it, and in black Sharpie wrote, "To be opened if audit discrepancies arise." I didn't write my name on the outside. Didn't need to. Anyone reading what was inside would know exactly who put it there. Back at the office, I walked straight to the compliance archive cabinet, our dinosaur relic in a digital world, and slipped the envelope into the slot marked pending. It sat right between a shredded policy update from 2019 and a binder labeled Board Prep Materials Legacy. Then I went back to my desk, opened Slack, responded to 3 unrelated threads, dropped a laughing emoji on one of Brent's stupid gifs about streamlining, nodded along in the afternoon meeting where he quoted a blog post like it was gospel, and told the CFO that legacy processes are dead weight. I said nothing, because I wasn't playing anymore. I'd been playing their game, soft warnings, careful phrasing, hoping reason might still matter. But this wasn't chess. This was demolition, and Brent had already lit the fuse. All I did was mark the spot where the cracks would surface. I wasn't going to stop the report from being submitted. That was the point. I needed him to sign it, certify it, own it, because the signature would be the real trigger, not my objections. They could ignore my voice, but they couldn't unsign a report, and they couldn't say no one warned them, not when a notarized, timestamped memo sat 10 feet from legal's door. I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel heroic. I felt ready. It was like the weather had changed, and I was the only one who brought an umbrella. Let the storm come. Let the audit roll in like a tide. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to raise the stakes. The morning Brent presented the finalized Q3 report, the entire building felt like it had swallowed a sugar cube dipped in Red Bull. Everyone was buzzing. Even the IT guy wore a collared shirt. There were pastries in the kitchen, actual fresh ones, not the stale Costco muffins Sharon usually brought for team morale. The CFO was pacing in the hallway outside the boardroom, muttering numbers and sipping from a mug that said Finance Dad. I stood just outside the door, like a ghost haunting a meeting I was once essential to. From where I was posted, I could hear Brent's voice droning on, slick as oil spilled across tile. "What we've achieved this quarter is nothing short of transformational," he said, hitting that last word like he expected applause. "We eliminated redundant reviews, collapsed the legacy reconciliation structure, and pushed through a simplified ledger model that reduced compliance latency by 37%. Compliance latency. The man had turned risk mitigation into a traffic report. There was a light round of golf claps from the execs. CFO Joe chuckled and said, "I'll be honest, Brent, didn't think we could cut that much fat without slicing bone." "Just takes fresh eyes," Brent replied, smug and stupid. The boardroom erupted in that half laugh you hear when everyone's trying to seem impressed, but no one wants to be first to question a rising star. Especially one the CEO personally recruited. Brent had become the human embodiment of a LinkedIn post. Everyone wanted to believe in him, because believing in him meant the company was modern, agile, smart. They didn't want truth, they wanted momentum. When the meeting ended, the exec team spilled out like they'd just walked off a TED stage. Brent strutted past my desk, loosened his tie like a guy who just scored the game-winning touchdown at homecoming, and held a Starbucks cup like it was a mic he'd just dropped. "You missed a hell of a show," he said, pausing by my chair. I looked up. I'm sure it was illuminating. "Oh, it was," he grinned. "Lean, mean, clean." Then he winked, actually winked. "Told you, Cynthia, footnotes don't matter." I wanted to grab the nearest stapler and introduce it to his forehead. Instead, I blinked slowly. "You signed the certification?" Hot off the printer. He tapped the lid of his coffee cup like it was a trophy, streamlined and sealed. "You can take the rest of the day off, boss lady." And he turned and sauntered into the kitchen like a man who thought he'd just conquered Everest by taking the elevator to the top floor. I followed him inside because I needed water, not because I wanted to hear more. But he wasn't done. "Gotta say," he said over the hum of the Keurig, "I really think we've cracked something here. These old-school compliance cycles, they're fear-based. We need boldness now. Vision. The market doesn't reward caution, it rewards velocity." I was gripping the paper cup tighter than I meant to. "And if velocity leads us off a cliff?" He laughed a little too loud. "Then we fly, baby." I stared at him, trying to decide if he actually believed the garbage tumbling out of his mouth or if he just liked the sound of it. He leaned against the counter, sipped his coffee, and gave me a look like he was letting me in on a joke I was too square to get. "Relax, Cynthia. The numbers passed." The CFO's thrilled. "Nobody's coming for us. I took one step back. You're right. He raised an eyebrow. I nodded. You're absolutely right. And then I turned and walked out mid-sentence before he could say another word. Before the heat in my chest boiled over into something visible. Before the rage bloomed red across my face and betrayed the calm I'd curated like a weapon. I walked to the far stairwell, gripped the railing, and breathed. In, out, he had signed. That was all I needed. His signature was on that certification page now, tethered to every misclassified line item like an anchor around his ankle. That seal of approval, that arrogant flourish of ink had tied him to the train tracks, and the audit train was coming. He thought he'd just streamlined the company into a new era. What he didn't realize was that he'd walked directly into a bear trap wrapped in gift wrap. And I was the one who set it, not with a confrontation, not with a threat, with paper, with silence, with sequence. I didn't need to yell, I just needed to wait. The first thing I noticed about the auditor was the shoes, scuffed black Oxfords, salt-stained near the laces. That and the tiredness in his posture. Like someone who slept in too many airport hotels and eaten too many boxed muffins. His suit didn't quite fit, too long in the arms, slightly frayed at the cuffs, but his eyes, sharp, surgical. Kind of stare that sees through polished decks and skips straight to footnote #37 on page 17. Stephen glance, he said, barely glancing up from his clipboard as he entered the room. His voice was dry, almost bored. I'll be leading your Q3 review today. I'll need full ledger access, vendor classifications, and the certified report. Brent, of course, leapt up like a golden retriever in a startup hoodie. Absolutely, Stephen. You're going to love what we've done. We took a hard look at our operational structure and cut through the compliance bloat, streamlined the reconciliation process, centralized payment categorizations, and Stephen didn't look impressed or interested. Let's start with the ledger, he said flatly, flipping to a page on his checklist. Brent chuckled nervously. Right, my team's got the files ready. We've got a clean roll-up for vendor flow. Honestly, I think the numbers speak for themselves. He tapped the top folder on the table like it was a Nobel Prize. I slid into the back corner of the room, quiet, unreadable, invisible by design. The table was packed, Brent, 2 analysts, our controller, someone from legal pretending to check their phone, and me. Technically, I was there in an advisory capacity, which is corporate for. We didn't want her here, but we can't justify excluding her on paper. No one spoke to me. No one made eye contact. Brent had made it clear I was old guard, unnecessary, the kind of relic you store in a SharePoint folder and forget to grant access to. I opened my notebook, uncapped a pen, and waited. Stephen pulled out his laptop and opened the shared audit folder. Let's go through the vendor summary first. August and September. Brent leaned in. Sure, happy to walk you through the logic we used, basically. We consolidated the capital and operational classifications based on historical trend lines, and Stephen raised a finger. Just the ledger for now. Brent deflated a little, of course. While they fumbled through file names, I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope, and slid it quietly across the table toward Stephen. Thick, sealed, labeled in black Sharpie, to be opened if audit discrepancies arise. Stephen paused, glancing at it like someone who's just been handed an unlabeled vial. He didn't open it, not yet. He placed it beside his laptop, like a loaded gun he didn't need to fire yet. The room settled into an uncomfortable rhythm. Pages rustled, mice clicked. Brent talked too much. The analyst stayed too quiet. Legal blinked too slowly. Stephen scrolled through the vendor ledger, index finger tapping lightly on the trackpad with each new line. His expression didn't change, didn't flicker, but his tapping slowed as he moved deeper into the August payment section. Line 342, he said. Brent craned his neck. Yep, that's a Fortress Tech, contracted CapEx services. Stephen didn't reply. He scrolled again, then tapped line 388. And this one? Brent squinted. Same vendor, separate department, but also CapEx. Stephen reached into his briefcase, pulled out a hard copy of our lender agreement. My pulse clicked up half a notch. He opened to a bookmarked page and ran a finger down the column. Section 5.2b. Capital expenditures exceeding 18% quarter-over-quarter must be disclosed prior to fund utilization. He looked up. Was disclosure filed? Brent smiled, trying to regain footing. Well, that would be more of a legal or CFO-level item, but our categorization logic was vetted internally, and Stephen didn't blink. Was disclosure filed? Silence. CFO Joe cleared his throat but didn't speak. The controller stared at the table like it owed her money. Brent chuckled again, but this one didn't land. I mean, these are technicalities. The vendor summary supports our capital narrative. It's tight. Stephen finally broke eye contact. He reached for the envelope. The room shifted. Even legal sat up straighter. He opened the flap like it might hiss, pulled out the notarized pages, leafed through them in silence. 1 page, then 2, then 3. The rhythm of his breathing changed, not dramatically, just enough. He reached the Slack printout, stopped, read. His jaw moved slightly, grinding something invisible. Then he turned to Brent, not angry, not emotional, just cold. Who prepared this memo? He asked, voice like ice over a still pond. Brent gave a nervous laugh. What memo? I raised my hand. Stephen nodded, and for the first time all morning, every eye turned toward me. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Stephen's glance had the kind of stillness that unsettles people who mistake motion for authority. He didn't rush, didn't banter, didn't perform. He simply examined the report the way a surgeon examines a scan before an operation. No expression, no wasted energy. His eyes traced line items like they were blood vessels ready to burst. The pen in his right hand moved in tight, efficient strokes, until it didn't. He had reached page 6 of the ledger when his motion slowed. One beat, then another. The room was dead quiet, except for the hum of the overhead lights and Brent's foot tapping under the table like a metronome of mounting anxiety. Everyone could feel it, like a dog sensing a storm you can't see yet. Stephen circled a figure on the ledger, cross-checked it with the notarized memo. His eyes moved between the two documents 3 times, methodical. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, likely a calculator. Then he flipped open the lender agreement, dog-eared and annotated with military precision, and scanned section 5.2b. His pen hovered, then stopped. The click of silence landed like a hammer on the conference table. He looked up, straight at Brent. "This Q3 vendor ledger was certified by you?" Stephen asked, voice neutral, almost soft. "Dangerous." Brent straightened his shoulders and flashed a grin he probably practiced in the mirror. "Yes, sir. I personally oversaw the review process. Of course, we had inputs from various stakeholders, but yes, the buck stops with me." Stephen nodded once, then flipped to the second page of my memo. The notarization seal glinted faintly under the fluorescent lights. "And this document," Stephen said, holding it up, "was submitted by whom?" Brent gave a laugh that didn't match the moment. "Too high-pitched, too performative. I mean, I'm not sure what that even is. Looks like someone's private notes, probably taken out of context." "I prepared it," I said calmly. Heads turned like marionettes cut from their strings. Brent blinked at me, visibly thrown. "Wait, what?" I met Stephen's eyes, then glanced at the memo. That document was prepared in August. It outlines a misclassification issue with Q3 vendor expenses that I flagged prior to ledger finalization. "You never sent this to me," Brent snapped. "No," I said flat. "I submitted it to the compliance archive with instructions to be reviewed only in case of audit discrepancies." "Why wouldn't you escalate this?" Brent shot back, voice rising. "I did," I said. "I brought it up in the July prep call. You told me we weren't here to debate theory. Then I was removed from access to the ledger files." CFO Joe shifted uncomfortably. The controller quietly closed her laptop. Stephen turned back to the memo. "This line item here," he said, pointing at a $692,000 vendor split, "is tagged as CapEx. Based on this memo and your own ledger history, it was originally classified as OpEx in Q2, correct?" Brent's face had started to lose color. I mean, that's a fluid determination. It depends on how we scope the services. Contextually, it's not fluid if it pushes your capital expenditure over the 18% threshold," Stephen interrupted calmly. Legal finally spoke. "We might need to confer with our counsel before making." "You should," Stephen replied, snapping the folder closed. "Because according to this notarized warning, your internal compliance unit was aware of the breach risk 10 days before certification, and yet the final report was signed and submitted without disclosure to your lender." Wait, this is a misunderstanding," Brent said, now visibly sweating. "These were legacy entries. The classification model was reused from Q2 without adjusting for updated vendor payment terms," I said quietly. Stephen looked back at Brent, but not with anger, with pity. "Did you actually review the covenant terms before you certified this?" he asked. Brent opened his mouth, closed it, silence. Even the hum of the lights felt accusatory now. Stephen placed the memo beside the report, capped his pen, and leaned back in his chair. "We'll need to pause the review until legal provides clarity. I'll also be notifying your lender of a potential covenant breach as required by audit protocol." Brent looked at the CFO, who was now staring at a speck on the table like it held salvation. I remained expressionless. Hands folded, spine straight. Eyes neutral, not gloating, not smug, just ready, because this wasn't the climax. This was the crack in the ice. The real collapse hadn't even started yet. Stephen's voice, once neutral and dry, took on a new weight, an edge of deliberate gravity that made everyone in the room subconsciously straighten their spines. He tapped the final page of the notarized memo with the tip of his capped pen, and slowly slid it over the certified ledger like he was layering one crime scene over another. "Sir," he said, his gaze fixed on Brent, "you certified this?" You could have heard a paperclip drop. Brent blinked, mouth slightly open, caught somewhere between indignation and disbelief. It was the first time I'd seen him speechless for more than 3 seconds. "Well, I mean our team," he said, dragging the words out like chewing gum stuck to his teeth. "Our team did, due diligence. We cross-referenced the numbers. Everything was in alignment." Stephen didn't blink. "With which quarter?" Brent hesitated. I assume Q2? A single eyebrow lifted on Stephen's face. "So you reused the Q2 categorization model?" "Not reused," Brent said quickly. "We built on it, iterated. It's industry standard to carry forward-based classifications if the vendor scopes haven't materially changed." Stephen tapped the cap of his pen against the table once. "Did the vendor scopes change?" Brent glanced around the room like someone searching for a fire escape that wasn't there. "Well, procurement would have more insight on that," and Stephen cut him off with calm precision. "Because this misclassification qualifies as a liquidity threshold breach under Section 5.2. Brent swallowed. The air in the room thinned. The CFO finally moved, leaning forward just enough to let out a breathy, half-whispered, "Oh God." It wasn't blasphemy. It was resignation. The words hung in the air like fog over a lake at dawn. Everyone was quiet, staring at the same invisible cliff edge that Brent was now teetering on. Legal was frantically typing into their laptop. The controller's knuckles were white against the edge of her chair. One of the analysts shifted in their seat like a kid about to get blamed for a broken window. Stephen flipped back to the ledger. "Your capital outflows for Q3 rose by 22.6% quarter-over-quarter, correct?" Brent tried to recover. "Well, if you factor in deferred depreciation and pending invoices, I'm not factoring hypotheticals," Stephen interrupted. "I'm looking at the certified ledger and the executed drawdown request your company filed 4 days ago. That request was based on these numbers." Silence. I watched Brent's confidence unravel thread by thread. His tie looked tighter now. His smile was gone. There was no wink this time. Just the quiet panic of a man realizing the iceberg wasn't a metaphor, it was paperwork. It had a timestamp and a notary seal. Stephen turned back to me just briefly. "You documented this 10 days before certification?" "Yes." "Were you instructed not to escalate?" "I was removed from the reporting workflow. My access was revoked before I could submit formal edits." Brent snapped. "Because you were overstepping?" Stephen raised a hand. "Don't," just that one word, but it landed like a slap. Stephen turned to the CFO. "When did legal last disclose covenant risk to the lender?" Joe's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Then we haven't, not since Q2. Stephen nodded once. "You'll want to change that, today." Brent was visibly sweating now. His confidence had been drained so completely he looked smaller. He glanced down at the report with the kind of dazed horror usually reserved for blood tests or subpoenas. Stephen stood. "I'll be calling your lender's compliance desk within the hour. Per protocol, they must be notified of any certification errors with potential impact to drawdown eligibility." "Wait, can't we just amend the report?" Brent blurted out. "We can restate it. Cynthia can walk you through the—" "I will not be walked through anything," Stephen said, voice flat as stone. "This is not about optics. It's about exposure." He tucked the memo back into his briefcase like a final piece of evidence. "We'll resume review once your internal counsel completes an incident report and communicates remediation steps." Then, without a word to anyone else, he walked out. The door clicked shut like a judge's gavel, and the room erupted into the soft chaos of people pretending to whisper but not succeeding. Brent spun to the CFO. "We can spin this. We say it was a clerical error. We revise and resubmit." "Cynthia never brought this to you, certified it," Joe snapped, voice low but deadly. "You signed the damn thing. You stamped it with your ego." Legal spoke without looking up. "We need to freeze drawdown activities immediately or risk breach escalation." And I just sat there, quiet, still hands folded in my lap like a secretary at a funeral. Because what none of them understood yet, but they would, is that this wasn't just a mistake. It was evidence. And Brent had signed it in ink. Legal didn't ask. They didn't even use the polite tones people normally wrap around a request when trying to soften a blow. No one said, "Brent, could you give us a moment? Or would you mind stepping out for a bit?" There were no platitudes, no sugar. Just Allison from legal, usually mild, usually buried behind 3 monitors, looking up from her laptop with unblinking eyes and saying flatly, "Brent, we need you to leave the room." You could almost hear the sound of gravity pulling his ego out of orbit. He opened his mouth like he might argue, like he had something left to say, but no one met his gaze. Even the analysts were frozen, eyes locked onto the table like they were trying to become furniture. Brent stood slowly, hands twitching slightly at his sides. He looked at the CFO, at legal, at me, nothing. Then he left. No one spoke until the door latched shut behind him. Then Allison turned to me. "Cynthia, could you please walk us through the memo you submitted?" There was no venom in her voice. No false warmth either. Just exhaustion. Legal always knows when the storm has already landed. I opened my folder and pulled out a second printed copy of the memo. Unmarked, clean, complete with exhibits. "The issue starts with vendor payment classifications in July," I began. 3 vendors, Fortress Tech, Galley Systems, and 1 parse shifted deliverables across departmental scopes. I laid out the timeline, the procurement call where scope changed, the email thread confirming new payment terms, the revised vendor agreements, all timestamped and printed. Then I flipped to the ledger entry logs, highlighted the reused Q2 categorization file, showed the match line by line, same formulas, same column comments, no adjustments for timing or function. In Q2, these payments were categorized as operational expenses, I said, pointing to a green highlighted section. In Q3, they were shifted to capital expenditures without updated justification or reconciliation. I paused, then pointed to the covenant clause in the lender agreement, printed and tabbed. Section 5.2b requires pre-disclosure if capital expenditures increase more than 18% quarter-over-quarter. Based on the submitted ledger, Q3 CAPEX rose 22.6% undisclosed. The CFO flipped to that page and read it twice. His lips moved silently, counting the percentage. When he looked up, he wasn't angry. He looked haunted. This, he said, voice hollow, this triggers the clawback clause. I nodded once. Correct. Page 4, paragraph 3. It grants the lender the right to rescind current drawdowns and demand repayment of funds deployed under misrepresented certification. His hands moved faster now, flipping through the compliance protocol binder that no one had opened in months. The one I'd written. The one Brent had called paranoid scaffolding in a team meeting. He found the clause, read it, let out a long breath through his nose. That's $5 million. He muttered, minimum. Could be more if they factor in the standby facility. Legal looked grim. We need to notify the lender's compliance counsel before they hear it from the audit team. If clawback proceeds, we'll also need to reclassify this quarter's cash position as unstable on the next investor call. The controller winced. That'll ripple through revenue recognition. It will, I said, still calm. Especially if they accelerate repayment terms. The silence that followed wasn't the shocked kind. It was the resigned kind, like standing on the roof of a burning building and realizing no ladders coming. They weren't panicking, not yet, but the gears of corporate consequence had begun to grind, and everyone could hear the distant hum. I watched them move, flipping binders, rechecking dashboards, opening incident report templates. The room had changed. The power had shifted. And not because I'd yelled, not because I'd made a scene. Because I was right, because I had receipts. Because I'd spent 6 years building a system Brent had dismantled in 2 months for the sake of velocity. And now, he'd run that velocity straight into a regulatory buzzsaw. I stood and began collecting the documents page by page. Allison looked up. Cynthia, we'll need you to lead the internal remediation for this. I paused, of course. The CFO ran a hand through his hair. When the CEO hears about this, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because at that moment they all knew something Brent hadn't understood until it was too late. Control isn't in the title. Control is in the paper trail, and mine was bulletproof. The boardroom felt colder than usual, not physically, just in spirit. The long polished table, normally cluttered with laptops and LaCroix cans, had been cleared except for a neat stack of printed reports, few notepads, and one sealed envelope still sitting like a loaded gun at the center. Stephen Glantz, the auditor, sat at the head of the table, jacket off, tie slightly loosened, but face composed and unforgiving. Across from him sat the CEO, stone-faced, flanked by Legal and the CFO, both of whom looked like they hadn't slept in days. I stood near the far end of the table, silent, still, arms crossed lightly at my waist. Brent was nowhere to be seen. He'd been asked not to attend. The message was already clear. His presence was no longer necessary for the verdict to be delivered. Stephen didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. By certifying this report, he said, enunciating each word like it weighed something, your director created exposure to a $5 million covenant breach. The memo dated 10 days prior. He tapped it lightly, proves internal awareness of the risk before certification. He paused and turned to Legal. Your team has confirmed this, yes? Allison nodded once, solemn. The memo is notarized. It aligns with internal correspondence and ledger timestamps. We cannot claim we were unaware. Liability rests on the act of certification under known risk. The CEO's hands clenched on the table, knuckles bone white. He turned his gaze to me, not hostile, but searching. You didn't bring this directly to me, he said. Why? The question hung there like fog. No judgment, just that awful tone of a man realizing too late he'd placed trust in the wrong hands and ignored the right ones. I met his eyes, calm and even. I did escalate, I said. That's what the envelope was. No one moved. The CEO exhaled sharply, one long breath that sounded like years of denial crashing into a single undeniable moment. He looked down at the report, then at the memo, then closed his eyes for half a second before nodding once. It'll be all for now, Cynthia. I gave a slight nod and stepped back as Stephen collected his papers. Legal began murmuring next steps, crisis control, lender notification timelines, possible clawback scenarios. The room dissolved into quiet urgency like paramedics calmly cataloging a fatal wound. No raised voices, no outrage, just the reckoning. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The break room was quiet, halls still dim from the night cycle. On my desk sat a plain white envelope unsealed. Inside was a short note from HR confirming Brent's termination, effective immediately. No fanfare, no farewell, just removal. Underneath that note, another letter, this one signed by the CEO, an offer, Director of Compliance. No meetings, no interviews, just a recognition. They finally understood where the actual control had always lived. I didn't celebrate, didn't pop champagne or call anyone. I just picked up the original memo, the one with the red tab and the stamp seal, and walked to the compliance archive cabinet. Drawer 3, section Quarterly Risk Events. I slid the document into a new folder, labeled it in black ink, Q3 Brent, closed the drawer, locked it. Then I stood there for a moment, hands still on the key, listening to the quiet hum of an office that still believed in PowerPoint more than paper. I had no illusions this place would make more mistakes. There'd be more Brents, more people mistaking charisma for competence, velocity for precision. But not today. Today, the paper spoke louder than the pitch deck, and I'd made damn sure it was heard. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.